We're like sitting here in the dark. Let me make my screen brighter.
So, hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
No.
No.
Let's turn on.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, fortunately. This is Radius Extensions working group. We are meeting for the first time, and the group has approved just a few days ago. So, but we have a full agenda and very little time, so I won't waste time and quickly show some necessary slides like Note 12, the code of conduct. Paul?
Sorry, maybe since you just said about the reforming, just so that everybody know, the RADEXT group technically moved from ops to sec area.
Yeah.
We just discussed this with the ADs internally, and since for planning reasons, for scheduling, it's easier if it's in sec because there's a sec chair anyway handling it. They decided to just move it. So there's no practical implication, but I just wanted to point it out to people just in case they were wondering why.
Okay, so a few words about the chairs. I'm Valery Smyslov, my co-chair Margaret Cullen, and our responsible AD, Paul Wutas. He's already said a few words about why the group has moved to security area. And so there are some useful links you may use for the slides, for the leap, and for notes. So we have to do some administrative tasks. First, blue sheets. They are collected automatically, but please sign up with this QR code or with the link from the agenda, because unless you sign up, we won't have a room of enough size for the next IETF. So we have to show that there are enough attendees. So please. And we need volunteers. I can see that there are some Zulip users, so I think we need a Zulip scribe and 2 note takers. Any volunteers?
If we don't have at least one note taker, we don't get to have a meeting. So is there someone, please, who would take notes? I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Hugh? Q. Okay. Thank you, Q. And anybody else just want to be a backup in case Q gets up and speaks? Yeah, it's on. If you go to the agenda page, you can get it off of there. Is there someone else who would take notes as well? If you go to the agenda page and you go into the note-taking item, you can take notes there. I'll go there as well and just try to fill in if anything, if Q gets up and talks or anything.
And there is a note-taking tool, very convenient. So you can just enter your notes, type in your notes, and they show as you type. The link is from the Miteco.
Sorry, Paul, just a comment. I just noticed on Zulip that there's 2 channels, RADEX and RADEXTRA, and RADEXTRA actually has more people than RADEX. But I think our name is actually RADEX. So people might have to move to the right channel.
Okay, but I hope most people will use Miteco chat, which is connected to Zulip, so hopefully. Okay, I will monitor the chat and describe. So agenda, this is our agenda for today. And we have quite a lot of presentations. So, any question? Okay. Then first, I want to say a few words about our new charter and the milestones. So, Margaret.
Okay, so we as an official working group now have our official charter. There were changes made between what was presented at the last meeting and on the list and the actual approved charter. I think most of those were broadcast on the list, but we'll just go through the charter quickly so everyone knows where we are. The Radius Extensions Working Group is going to focus on extensions to Radius. This is all exactly the same as it was the first time. Any non-backwards compatibility changes need to be justified. Our goal is not to change Radius in a non-backwards compatible way. And we're going to review some of the existing RFCs and change their document track categories. So from experimental to standards track, most likely, and also make some other extensions that are backwards compatible with existing Radius use. If we go on to the next slide, we have certain work items in the charter. This is the kind of charter that has work items, and in order to add any additional items that aren't covered by this, we would need to recharter. We're not just open to general extensions to Radius. So what we have here are deprecating the use of insecure transports, bringing 6614 and 7360 to the standards track. Those will probably happen at the same time. Defining best practices to use TLS PSK with Radius. Defining best practices for Radius roaming and roaming consortia based on experience with Radius TLS. Improving operations for multi-hop Radius networks, extending the 8-bit Radius ID, allowing for COA and disconnect packets to be sent in the reverse direction, and defining ALPN extensions for Radius TLS. And it should, I think, say and Radius DTLS, even though it does not, which allow using those transports for FIPS compliant networks. And so those are the work items that we have, and we're trying to complete most of this work by 2024 because we want to be part of the Wi-Fi 8 release. So we have a fairly short time frame for doing this work. Next. I think the next is the milestones, right? Yeah, okay. And so the milestones are listed here. We have 2 of them coming up in August, and so we're hoping to adopt these work items here and on the list immediately after this meeting. That's for the reverse COA and TLS PSK documents. Very shortly after that, we want to do that's for the ALPN negotiation and COA. Very shortly after that, we wanted to do the TLS PSK document. Only a few months after that, we want to get the TLS BIS document and the DTLS BIS document out to the ISG. Then after that, we're going to deprecate the secure uses of Radius, and then we're going to do 2 other things that we wanted to do, which are to do the status realm work and also extend the 8-bit ID space. So that's what we have on board. We already have some documents out that have started work on some of these items. Those aren't working group documents yet. Everything's an individual document. We only officially became a working group 3 days ago. So hopefully we'll be adopting some documents very shortly. Get back to I think I have the agenda somewhere here. What's up first on the agenda? So that was the working group charter milestone review. I guess reverse COA is up, Alan.
Hello. There isn't a lot changed in the reverse COA draft from London. To remind people, the issue is that when you have TLS connections from client to server, Sometimes those translate through NATs. And if you want to send COA packets, you can't, because you can't get to the destination IP. And so the idea is you have a TLS tunnel, just send them down the TLS tunnel in reverse. There is a little bit of magic there. Which tunnel do you pick? How do you forward those based on realms, which are now in the operator name, I believe. But there is a draft on normal COA proxying. It's basically using the same thing. And then when you're in your local network, how do you get it to the NAS? Your Radius server somehow knows how to get it to the NAS. So we're not standardizing the proxying decisions. We're trying to standardize just that it is done and how it is done. Hopefully there isn't a lot of controversy. So yeah, we'll go through the slides. That's the introduction. Next slide. Yeah. So this is effectively what I said. There is some interest in using this in roaming federations. So open roaming now uses IPsec or DTLS depending. If you use IPsec, you have a network, you can send COA packets. If you use TLS, you can't. And so when you're billing people, it would be nice for the home network to reach out to the visited network and say, please disconnect this user. So there is interest in this from a couple of different places. Next slide. So we use the operator realm as per RFC 8559 or static configuration. Really, it's a very straightforward idea. There are some minor implementation issues, but it's pretty straightforward. Next slide. I think it talks about, yes. It's been shipping for over a year in Aruba, Cisco, and FreeRadius. Some of the original work was done with me and the other co-author, Vadim. Cisco ships it. Heki tested it with Aruba. Aruba's happy to accept COA packets over TLS connections. So this works in practice. It's running in production. It would be nice to be able to have a standard for it. And what we really need is we really need people to review it and make sure there's nothing egregiously bad in it. I believe that's it. Next slide. That's it. Okay. Questions? Yeah.
Heikki Vatiainen, can we change the name a little bit?
Sure.
Because I just thought that since it's basically COA over shared or existing transport, so that would make it maybe a little bit more clear what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, the TLS and DTLS transports allow for forward COA over TLS and DTLS, but nothing allows it for request packets to go backwards over connection. So reverse COA is not really a good name, but I'm not sure exactly what else to call it.
Okay. And I guess for the key generation and other things, there will be more refinements in the draft.
Yeah.
I can comment on the list about those. Okay.
So we just like to make a quick call. How many people here have read this document? Very few people. We need to try to adopt this quickly as a working group work item, but asking people who haven't read it whether they want to adopt it is always questionable. So I guess what we'll do is make a call on the list right after this meeting, because I'm not going to ask the one guy if he wants to adopt it. If you guys could read this, though, this is one of our first milestones, and we need to get these done quickly. So coming up with an opinion by right after this meeting would be
Yep.
good, because I'll make a call on the list right after the meeting for 2 weeks to see if people want to adopt it. And it would be good if we got some yes answers.
I think Mark has a comment.
Thank you. Mark, please.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, Alan. Yeah, just a comment. You mentioned, I guess, roaming federations and open roaming, and then you mentioned operator name 126, operator ID, and you was. I think I just want to caution that to not assume that the tag 1, which is realm, is always used in operator ID. Sort of open roaming federation uses the open roaming WBA ID under namespace tag 4 in their 126 attribute and not realm. And so a little cautious that on your return routing that you don't always assume a realm is in operator name.
Sure. For that, tag 1 is what's standardized in the IETF. SDOs are free to do whatever, but yeah, it's worth adding something in the document saying you could do similar routing decisions based on SDO information using the operator realm attribute, whatever its contents. But yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next presentation.
Anybody else have anything on this document? Okay, you want to go on to the ALPN?
Yes, so ALPN, which is, I guess, a better name than what I had suggested in London. MD5 is dead. If we go to the next slide, MD5 has been dead for 15, 20 years. Next slide, yeah. Okay. So the idea here is a bit better than what I said last time. You start off with TLS, same port as we've been using for a long time with RADSEC or DTLS. Do ALPN negotiation, which then lets you do different application layer protocols based on the ALPN negotiation. And the goal is to allow the removal of dependency on MD5. Next slide. So picking something, called it radius 1.1. It's not radius 2.0, it's not diameter. The technical content is user password, etc., is encoded as text as per 8044. No more attribute obfuscation. Message authenticator is ignored. CHAP, MS CHAP, etc. can still be transported because only the home server needs to do any kind of MD5. Any proxying treats those just as opaque blobs. So there's no other changes to the attribute encoding. If we go to the next slide, proxies do not decode or interpret CHAP. So if you want to do CHAP, great. If you want to do MS CHAP, great. None of the proxies know, none of the proxies care. Home servers can still do whatever they want, but avoiding MD5 for the client to server TLS transports mean that the sessions can still transport MD5 data. The home server can still do MD5 hashes. It's just the proxies can now be FIPS compatible, which it was impossible before. Next slide. So we've repurposed the authenticator field, a 32-bit request reply token to allow 2 to the 32 packets on the same connection. Flags, these flags were added sort of at the last minute as I was putting the last draft out. Alex had some good comments on the mailing list. The idea with the flags is we have unused bits in the header. We might as well do something with them. And the idea would be to allow signaling to the client or the server that the packet being received was sent over secure transports. So if there's a hop in the middle, which is UDP, after a proxy chain, those flags would be cleared and you'd be able to know. And one case in particular is if you're doing EAP, and the server should be able to say, hey, I'd like all the remaining packets to be sent over TLS, so that if you have a proxy failover, it doesn't suddenly open you up to unencrypted UDP, and all your traffic that you hoped was encrypted is now not. Unfortunately, this is on a request reply basis, per packet basis. It's a little more difficult to do it per realm, per user, whatever. So running away from that problem is likely best. Next slide. So changes from what I had called S-Radius, that was a terrible name. ALPN is better. Lots more cleanups in the document. I've gone through lists of attributes, added discussions of the protocol error, packet type, which has to be handled specially, lots more explanation of corner cases and guidance to implementers. And barring discussion of these two flags, the document's pretty close to being done. If people don't know what to do with the flags, we can get rid of them. Otherwise, it doesn't hurt to know that your packets have been encrypted. Questions?
Hi, Janfred, DFN. We already had a short discussion about the flags. I think it would be probably a good idea to also have a sort of strict transport security flag that the service provider or the NAS can actually request that all packets are sent via an encrypted channel, especially if you look for things like privacy concerns, GDPR, that you can make sure that, for example, the MAC address of the device never gets leaked.
Yeah. The flags came out of a discussion I had with Stefan Winter about this. That's what he suggested. My confusion at the time was, how does the NAS know to set these flags, right? I'm trying to proxy to some domain, or I'm trying to send packets to some domain. How do I know to set the flags? And I think the answer to that is really implementation magic. We can put the flag in and we can say somehow your outbound proxy talks to that realm and knows that that realm has made a statement to set this flag. But if you don't have the flag, you can't use it. If you do have the flag, somehow magically it can be set. So yeah, I think we need a couple more flags. You know, we need require this and informational flags. Hey, was this packet sent over secure or insecure networks? And that's very easy to do. Yeah. Yes, Heikki.
Heikki, please.
Heikki Vatiainen, you mentioned on the slides that the password field would now be text type.
Yeah.
What I guess we have seen is, all of us who have done implementations, that sometimes the passwords are not in UTF-8 format. So I was thinking that would it be more safe or safer to have them as binary? Because what happens is that now if they are really treated as text, then encoding error would cause something to happen when there is garbage coming in and it's not in UTF-8 format. So what would the server do at that point?
Yes. I don't know we want to change the definition of user password that way from 2865, but it is worth putting something in going, you know, it should be UTF-8, but if it isn't, you still have to transport it, right? I believe 8044 talks about invalid attributes, which are malformed. It doesn't discuss the issue of UTF-8. It's probably worth adding here. Yeah.
Because I think the text type is UTF-8.
Yeah. And I know I've seen people who put
Mm.
in 16-bit character encoding, right? And
Yeah,
it works for them.
Mm.
It should work for them, and it shouldn't be forbidden. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, same question for this this document. Who has read this document at this point? Okay. All two of you. Again, we'll go to the list for adoption because I don't see the point in asking two people either. So
Yeah. I mean, people.
up there are three people. Well, I mean, I also have read it, but it's and I suspect Alan has read it, but I still will make a call on the list because normally what happens is you ask in the room, and if the room says yes, then you check on the list, and if people are quiet, you take that as they agreed with the room. But I don't feel comfortable asking the list if they agreed with one or two of us.
Okay. Me again. Okay. Yes. TLS PSK. So next slide. The problem with 6614 and 7360 is they mention PSK, but they don't say what to do. So I don't know of any NAS equipment that supports PSK. Free Radius has supported it for a decade. I don't know how many people are using it. So it's good to have a document saying, here's how to use it. And the issue, especially what some of the EduRoam people have been running into, certificates are hard, right? It can be hard to get certificates. You have to lie to the CAs and tell them you're using web certificates and then put them in your Radius system. And some people think that's bad. Certificates last for a while and it's hard to know when to renew them or who to renew them, who has the responsibility in your organization to renew them, as opposed to PSKs. Next slide. So the one main change from using a shared secret is you need an identity, and it's just an identity of the NAS. Josh Hallett and I have been having some conversations on the list as to whether or not every NAS Radius client should have its own identity or whether those can be shared. I think it's safer to say you shouldn't share them. Josh has reasons why you should. I don't have strong opinions there. That's more of a security operations issue than real protocol design. So next slide. So the document is just a discussion of when and why and how to use PSK and guidance, how to use it. The UIs have to update. You shouldn't use the Radius shared secret for PSK, etc. I think that's it. Okay.
Heikki Vatiainen, in section 4, there's named guidance for Radius clients, and it says that PSK is a must for clients. Is the idea also to mandate it between server-server proxy setup where a server is a client?
Yeah.
Okay.
It should.
And there is the references to RFC 4279 in section 4.1 PSK identities. It looks a little bit old because it's talking about originally TLS versions less than 1.2, and then it was updated to say 1.2. So should it maybe just be copied what the parts are needed from there and not to have a dependency to an old draft? And also in EduRoam, I think there is an idea to use the these so-called policy voids in the certificates that tell that, okay, this server is supposed to be a IDP or identity provider or service provider, but with PSK, that kind of information is not available because there's just a key. So is there going to be that kind of comparison of what good is in certificates, so that just only that certificates are bad because there are more information in certificates than in PSK?
Yes, it should discuss all that. There's also the issue of dynamic DNS with Radius. You can look up a server certificate there. It's probably not a good idea to use dynamic DNS with PSK because your PSKs are out there. Yeah. So yes, this all has to be updated and added. Yeah.
Jan-Fred speaking. I think we also should consider or should keep in mind that PSK is one use case for people who used UDP and just want to move to a mechanism that they know, which is, here you have a shared secret. Please don't call it shared secret anymore because now it's a PSK. Please don't really use it. But just type this in, add the identity, and it works. And you don't have the slack of requesting certificates. For bigger deployments, like, for example, the national roaming in EduRoam, we will still use certificates. So if we need certificate attributes, then we'll still use certificates, but the PSK is intended to, or at least that's what I gather, is intended to ease the deployment of secure transport where previously UDP was used.
Yes. Okay.
I have a comment. I'm gonna make it from here. I kind of agreeing with what Jan Frederick just said. If you replace the shared secrets, I mean, we already know, like in our deployment, I run the EduRoam operations for the US, who's an SP and who's an IDP. I could view here where their username might just be their operator name, and they would use a PSK, and it would be a very easy transition compared to moving everybody to certificates, which, unless we ran our own CA, I don't even know how we would do that.
Okay.
We are running out of time, so
That's you, Jan Frederick is next.
Okay. Fun fact for Germany, we run our own CA for EduRoam because the national roaming in Germany is completely based on Radius over TLS and certificates. Okay, so speaking of Radius TLS, we have this RFC 6614, which is an experimental draft. An experimental RFC. The RFC says, well, let's revisit it once it has been deployed, and it has. So we want to make Radius TLS a proposed standard. As I just heard in the TLS working group, the D in TLS is silent. 6614 only talks about TLS, not DTLS. Probably worth adding a new draft, or maybe even incorporating DTLS in the document. Not sure. Please feel free to say your ideas regarding that. Next slide, please. So, since the last meeting in London, I have pushed some changes in the text. We wanted to use we wanted to update the TLS versions and the mandatory to implement cipher suites. I added a reference to the TLS BCP for TLS guidance and for the cipher suites. TLS 1.3 is included as recommended and not as mandatory because we felt that well, we didn't want to change the spec too much, and for the TLS, the Radius V1113 is mandatory, so hopefully everyone will change to that. For TLS PSK, most text that is needed there probably is not needed anymore because of Alan's draft regarding TLS PSK, so There should be just references to the draft of Alan. I've added raw public keys as well. There is some basic text, like I think one sentence, hey, you should do raw public key as well, or you should allow a raw public key as well. Of course, the text needs to be expanded. Next slide. We wanted to add server name indication. There has not been any text added yet. And if you have any further updates that you want to see in RFC 6614Bs, then please speak now. If you go to the next slide, then I have some discussion items. The first one, we've talked about it a bit on the list, is as well the credential sharing that Alan just brought up in the PSK draft. Is it okay? Is it not okay? I think there have been some arguments for the one and the other. Then we have the RFC 2119 modifier for TLS PSK. Should it be required or just recommended? And for raw public key as well, which modifier do we choose there? My suggestion would be to make PSK required, raw public key recommended, but I can be persuaded to do anything else. And I think I should have a next slide with some things, further discussion items and next steps. I've added some text regarding the certificate checks for dynamic peer discovery. The 7585, which is the dynamic discovery RFC, suggests using the subject alt name NAI realm, an extension that this RFC, I think, defined itself. Is anyone using that? I haven't seen it. If you do DNS discovery, then you probably get a host name. So maybe you can do subject alt name match for that host name if there is no NAI realm present in the certificate. Also, 7585 is still experimental. Do we want to update that? Probably, but someone has to write the document. It has one erratum, I think it was by you, Alan, which is in status held for document update. So there should be some updates, at least waiting. Yeah. So basically, that's the status of this document. There have been questions about, is it ready for WG adoption yet? I feel it needs at least one more iteration as individual draft. Maybe we can do an adoption call in a few months.
And can I just get a feel, how many people have read this draft at this point? Okay, so once again, 3 or 4. This is pretty core to what we're trying to do. So if there's like one draft, you read this week for this working group, this would be a good one because we're going to need to get feedback on this document. Even though it's a little later in the milestones, it's probably one of the bigger things we're going to be doing as far as effort. So, Alan?
Yeah, in terms of DTLS, I didn't have time to try to update that. I'm happy to merge it into this document. The question is, how big does this document get? It might be worth, in fact, just throwing everything into this one and going TLS, DTLS, dynamic discovery. They're all very closely related.
It would be annoying if the documents were different in ways that they could be the same implementation wise. So this is just me as an individual contributor. I'd rather see one document that is only different where it has to be different than 2 documents where we could end up not syncing them well. But
I think throwing TLS and DTLS in one document is a good idea. I would suggest keeping the dynamic peer discovery separate because it has a lot of text that doesn't really reference TLS so much. Okay. Thank you.
Heikki Vatiainen. The previous draft Alan was presenting said that PSK should only be used with TLS 1.3, and here we have both 1.2 and 1.3. So would it be possible now go with TLS 1.3 with this revision too?
I think the reason why we discussed and came to the conclusion that we don't want to mandate TLS 1.3 is that the spec for RFC 6614 mandated TLS 1.2, and we didn't want to change too much. And if the opinion of the working group changes and we want to mandate TLS 1.3 for that, I would have no objection to that.
Oh, okay. Or to put it in different words, is there a problem if we have one document saying that PSK with 1.3 and then we have another document that says that you can use PSK and it also says that you can use TLS 1.2? So do this and the previous draft somehow conflict each other?
Yeah, I think we'll have to take that question to the working group because we're running out of time, and I also think we're not going to decide that in this discussion. I think it may depend what happens over time before we publish this too. So, Alan, you're up again.
Yeah, one more thing that is the favorite extension. So say something about session resumption. So when somebody returns that, do we have to know who they are and if they should be able to return their TLS session?
Yeah, I'll look into it and probably add something for security considerations.
Yeah.
Deprecating insecure transports. Next slide. This is the one that was somewhat more controversial because the first draft was saying no UDP, no TCP, and everyone got excited over it. That was partly intentional to get people to look at it and to raise awareness about the issue. In short, MD5 is garbage. It's been garbage for years. The document goes through some stats. Basically, a hobbyist can crack every 8-character shared secret in a short period of time. And if you have beer money, where beer money is defined as, the government has beer money, almost anything you can think of as less than 12 characters can be cracked without really much effort. So sending UDP protected by 12-character shared secrets means whatever you're protecting is readable. People have read it. There are state actors looking at packets on the net. And among other things, one of the privacy issues this document raises is what are the implications of your trillion-dollar company where the location of your CEO is known to within a 10-minute interval and a 5-meter radius with 5580 in location attributes, right? He's roaming, Wi-Fi is turned on, everyone knows exactly where he is all the time. This could be a problem. And then this was an issue raised a while ago. Tunnel password has something like 12 bits of entropy when you use it with COA packets, which seems to be bad. Next slide. The proposal, just use TLS or IPsec. Most global roaming partners have been using IPsec since the 90s. I believe open roaming uses either IPsec or TLS, which makes sense. There are a large number of cloud providers who are somewhat less happy about using security, and they just throw UDP packets across the internet. The document here should likely be standards track. We have decades of experience with IPsec and Radius, and at least 10 years of experience with TLS. Next slide. So one of the issues raised by Bernard was not a lot of people seem to be using DTLS. A lot of access points implement it. I believe Cisco implements it, client and server. RADSEC proxy implements it. I haven't gotten around to doing it. I hope to do so this summer. And some widely used servers rhyming with NPS do not support TLS at all. But if it becomes required, that can be highlighted and that can be implemented. So it really is, do we have consensus to go, it's 2023, sending UDP packets over the net in clear text is a bad idea, especially for something as secure, you know, or should be as secure and security related as Radius. Next slide. I think that's it. That's it. Okay. Questions?
Single question, because we are running out of time.
Mhm.
Running out of time.
Is
Yeah.
anyone on the queue?
Okay.
Just one thing about IPsec, there was discussion on the list that it's a little bit problematic because it's not visible on the application level or the previous level, implementation level. And I just thought today realized that it will also show up as an unsecured link when thinking about the Alpen draft.
Sorry, what do you mean again?
If there is an IPsec secured link, then the radio server doesn't know about it, then it will show us the flags will be set to 0.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
Mm. So maybe,
There isn't much you can do about
Yeah.
that.
and so maybe make this IPsec as something that is less preferred than the
Yes.
TLS. Very,
Yeah. Makes
TLS
sense.
would be
I
TLS.
think TLS would be better.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Done?
I'm next when you're done. Yeah. So I'm presenting this document because none of my other co-authors could be here, but I'm going to be handing off editing this document to somebody else. Well, just because I don't want to chair and edit the document at the same time, but this is the status realm and loop detection document. We wrote this document because we're operating a multi-hop radius fabric, and we noticed a lack of tools that we could use, kind of bringing the radius routing world into maybe the late 1980s or early 90s as far as internet routing, where we could actually do something like a multi-hop ping or trace route, and where we had some sort of loop detection and therefore loop prevention capabilities. And so we wrote this document to ask for those things. If we go to the next slide. It was presented at the last meeting. There's where the document is. We got feedback. Thank you especially to Alexander Clowder, who gave us some feedback on the list. Excellent editorial and clarity suggestions. There were a couple of technical issues raised, most of which were resolved on the list. And the basic functionality for this is implemented in FreeRadius. The status realm is implemented by Alan. The loop prevention we implemented in FreeRadius configuration, actually. So next slide. There were a couple of things that have come up. One was a suggestion to add a timestamp to the status realm responses. It would require definition of a higher resolution timestamp because the radius data type is in seconds, and that wouldn't be very useful. It might offer some visibility, but the discussion on the list kind of ended with clock skew is likely to make it not all that useful. And so the question is, should we add one or not? I think the authors, based on the end of the discussion on the list, are thinking no, but if anybody wanted to jump up and say yes, this would be a good time to do that. And then the other one was that we want to implement this and experiment with it. And to do that, we need a type code, a packet type code for Radius. There's an IANA registry that's ISG approval, which means if the working group asks Paul and Paul agrees, he can tell IANA and we can get a number. It's not a densely populated field, so we're hoping we can get a number for this to experiment with it. And we're suggesting 35 because that's the next unused code. Paul?
Paul, just a clarification. ISG approval does not mean I can do that. It means the ISG can do that, and I'm only 1/16 of the ISG. So
Okay, because Alan had talked to Iana, and they said you could do it. So we'll have to clarify that with Iana. But it is, I recall it is weird because it says ISG approval, but then there's another one for published document. So it's, I don't know, we'll figure out whether, I mean, either it would be you approve or you would take it to a telechat. And, but we need to ask you first. And so I guess I'd be interested in knowing if anyone objects to us asking for a packet type code for this. Next slide. This document was the source of the working group work item that appears in our charter for exactly these things. So I'm hoping if people read it, we can adopt it as a working group work item for that item. How many people in the room have read the document? Yeah, that would be like my co-author and one other guy. So we got to get people to read all of these documents, obviously. I think there's no other
Of
slides,
the
right?
chat, one more people read the draft.
Okay, so there were as many as 3, but so we've got to once again get people to read these documents. Does anyone have any comments on the 2 questions? Can you go to the previous slide? If anyone has any comments on these things or anything else, I think Alexander's on the queue.
Hello.
Excellent.
Yeah, just on the timestamp, I think Alan flagged up that we could just look at the deltas as it passes back through the server. Because he corrected me, you can't get asymmetric routing and radius, so everything goes back along the same path. So maybe the top skew could be just luckily bypassed because it's a delta on the same box. So it'd be nice to see it, and at least you'll get what the delay is from that hop all the way to the end and back again. And that might be useful because you can probably infer other things from that. Happy to help wherever I can, though.
Yeah, I mean that could work. I don't object to doing the work. The question is just, would it be useful? So if you think that would be useful, we have to add the new data type, which is some probably millisecond or sub-millisecond granularity in order for it to be interesting, because the round trips are not that long, in at least some, depends what you're using up above it and stuff, how long they are, but they're not, it won't be interesting in seconds.
Yeah, this is Alan. Honestly, just call it an integer and describe it as, delta in milliseconds or something. It'll be good enough.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out the details, but we'll work on that. Any other queued humans?
No, we are in of
Okay.
time, so
All right, what's up next?
the next presentation.
Yeah, is that Alan again? I think it's 8-bit ID.
Yes, this one was originally requested or came from the RADEXT group before it got shut down. Next slide. It really is 8 bits are not enough. We're not 1989, 1991 anymore. Using more source ports causes a problem. This has been highlighted as a problem for a decade now. Nobody has a solution. My idea was we have a 16-byte unique ID that's globally unique, temporally unique. Just use it, right? Why not? Turns out some of the ALPN stuff is a lot easier to implement once you do TLS. So the question is, do you want to dump this and just say TLS and say legacy radius is dead and garbage? Because the hard part about this, I think if we go to the next slide, talks about this. The hard part is really the negotiation, which is we're doing normal radius. At some point, would like to use more than 8 bits of packets per connection. You have to negotiate that, which means tracking packets the old way and the new way at the same time, which is a nightmare. There's pages of text in the document about how to do this. There is some implementations which have been done. There are minor changes to attributes. If you're using the request authenticator as an ID, you have to have an attribute in the reply, which contains that request authenticator that lets you match up request and reply. Next slide. Yeah, so if we get rid of negotiation, this is actually relatively straightforward. You just go set a flag on client and server. They now track based on request authenticator instead of ID. Everything's simple. If you want to do negotiation, it's a horrible pain. And I'd almost be inclined to just throw this out and tell everyone it's 2023, use TLS and ALPN, because that just has a 32-bit ID and it's easy. So this is one of these, we need to solve the problem. Do we solve it this way, or do we just solve it a more complicated way, which may be better long-term? I don't know. I'd be happy to have one less document, if that's a hint. Questions?
I have a question and a comment. I'll do the comment first, which is, yes, it would be nice to have one less document. I would rather we didn't define an entire mechanism for this when we're trying to replace this. But also, this applies, I guess, the ALPN document too, in a sense. Why? What is the preference for doing the 32-bit value rather than the 48-bit value of both this and the ID?
Yes. The issue with using the ID is you have to track not just the ID, but the packet type. So the 8-bit ID space is actually per packet type, which makes implementations much more complicated and causes problems for things like protocol error, where you want to be able to say, I have an error with a packet you sent me, but now you have to say what kind of packet. And if you just throw away the ID and have some token which is globally or unique per packet, then a lot of the implementation just becomes a lot easier.
Thank you. I had forgotten about that. I think blocked it out.
Yeah, there's a lot of trauma there with historical garbage. Alex.
Cluter again. I would approve having this document gotten rid of, because the ALPN stuff is just cleaner, makes more sense, and also is a bit of a carrot to persuade people over to it, maybe. It seems to be all better on that side of the fence. Thanks.
Jan-Fred speaking. Yeah, I would also suggest just leaving it along the way. I'm not sure if there are some security considerations in that document already, because the request authenticator is also used for the obfuscation of the attributes. So maybe there is some security consideration if we then or if NASs think it's a good idea to just count the request authenticator up, because it's easier.
So if we do go down this path, there's pages of text in this document as to why it works, and it doesn't change anything on the client side other than tracking the request authenticator instead of the ID. But all of the practices of generating the request authenticator, signing the packets, everything, it's exactly the same. It doesn't change anything. So that's at least somewhat reasonable there. But yes, after doing the ALPN and coming back and looking at this, I think I started bleeding out my ears and decided it was pretty crazy. But yeah, okay.
So do we have some of the, either of the Rabble people here who would like, we do have 1 minute left if they want to come up and talk about the document they asked to talk about if time allowed? Okay, well, it's in the agenda. If you read it and provide them feedback, hopefully they will appreciate that. Oh, I guess Mark Grayson's on.
Yeah, I guess we've run out of time, Margaret, but thanks very
You
much.
have
for that.
exactly 30 seconds.
Yes. Just maybe very quickly, we see Bluetooth evolving from a point-to-point connection to be more network-wide, with silicon manufacturers having sort of virtual MAC addresses and delivering, I guess, mobility to Bluetooth. And therefore, we think there's an opportunity to use Radius to enhance multi-vendor, multi-domain aspects of Bluetooth roaming.
So my understanding is what you're looking for is feedback from people who understand Radius,
That's correct.
aka
Yes.
this group.
Yes.
Okay, and the documents up on the screen here now, draft, Grayson, Radex, Rabble, so people can find that and hopefully provide feedback on it.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for all who participated. It was very tough agenda, and we managed to just be 1 minute late. And hopefully the next time we'll allocate a longer session slot, and we'll be discussing more items. So thank you very much, and I encourage to participate in the discussion on the mailing list. Thank you.